Velvet Assassin starts off conflicted. On the one hand, the stealth genre hasn't had much representation this generation, and on the other, World War II games have become so commonplace that many people write them off without giving them any thought. Mixing these two together, however, isn't done too often, and gives a chance to bring life to both worlds. Unfortunately, though it had a chance to stand out, Velvet Assassin isn't any better than the sum of its parts. Players control Violet Summer, a World War II spy inspired by the life of Violet Sabo. The story is actually told through the protagonist's memories as she lies dying in a hospital bed, with each level unlocking a bit more of her life's journey, with occasional glimpses into her current predicament. Each level tells of a different mission during Violet's life, which are loosely tied together with cutscenes, with little continuity between them. It's hard to become invested in any individual section, as the lack of focus seems to imply that the levels are simply stepping stones to learning more about Violet, and how she ended up in her comatose state. It feels like it's slowly building up to some sort of revelation or climax, but that moment never truly comes, leaving gamers without a payoff for their hours of work. In order to succeed, Violet must observe her enemy's movements and actions, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. By stalking her prey, she's able to sneak up and deliver brutal killing blows, before pulling their body into the shadows, where she's completely invisible. When everything works perfectly, the enemy's movements are memorized and the level's layout is well known, the gameplay is fluid. It's incredibly rewarding to take down a room full of enemies without raising suspicion, using only a knife and a very limited amount of ammunition. However, getting to that point is another story entirely. In order to memorize the best tactics, trial and error is usually the only way, and since Violet isn't a fighter, it can take several tries before a working strategy is discovered. This mixes poorly with the game's sparsely placed save points, and is amplified even more by the enemy's tendency to engage in long-winded conversations entirely in German. On top of that, the enemy's detection seems to vary from person to person, making it much harder to accurately know when Violet is hidden. Generally speaking, shadows make her invisible, but there are times where she should, by all means, be completely hidden, and enemies will still be able to detect her. Other times, however, they're completely oblivious to her presence, ignoring doors opening 2 feet from their faces or bodies that appear to be in plain sight. To break things up a bit, Violet can occasionally don a Nazi uniform and engage in some urban stealth, attempting to avoid detection while fully visible. While a good idea in theory, the execution is flawed, and pales in comparison to the disguise system used in other stealth games. It's simply too hard to remain disguised, and the enemies seem to have such a good grasp of their comrade's appearance that it's barely worth the effort to change clothing. In another attempt to shake things up, the game will occasionally reward Violet's stealth with more weapons and ammunition, forcing her to engage in combat and turning the game into a third-person shooter. These segments don't work out too well, relying too heavily on the game's shooting mechanics, which aren't as developed as the stealth. The same can be said for the leveling system, which doesn't have a large enough impact on the game to be worthwhile. The stealth mechanics work well when they function correctly, but there's really nothing in Velvet Assassin that wasn't in the original Metal Gear Solid, and Replay Studios does little to further the genre or take advantage of the current generation's power. Velvet Assassin doesn't sugarcoat the horrors of war. There's a depressing atmosphere surrounding the entire game, and the visuals are gritty and realistic. With the exception of the fantasy-like morphine mode, which throws a dreamy filter over the screen as Violet takes time to either hide or get a quick kill, the game's environments are dark and moody. Graphically, there's nothing stand out about the game, but the visuals and audio get the job done. There are plenty of good ideas in Velvet Assassin. Sadly, they've all been done before. The stealth mechanics simply aren't anything special and don't work as well as they should. There's no true payoff, and most of the time the game is more frustrating than it is entertaining. While stealth fans might enjoy the story of Violet Summer, most gamers will likely end up being left in the dark. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out the full text review on Gamervision.com.